Because for a generation in this country, we had American presidents and American political leaders, and let's be honest, folks, it wasn't just Democrats, it was Democrats and Republicans who would ship our jobs overseas, close our factory doors, and do not a damn thing for the American worker. So how nice is it in Washington, D.C. to have a government that is going to protect your jobs, that's going to fight for this facility and say, very simply, if you're building it here, if you're making it here, if you're producing it here, we are going to give you, and already have given you, a big fat tax cut. That's a good thing. But if you make it overseas, if you try to do something with a foreign worker as opposed to an American worker, if you try to ship our great American jobs and great American factories overseas, then you are going to pay a big fat tariff before you bring that crap back into the United States of America. And that's what President Trump's economic policies are all about, my friends. It's the carrot and the stick. We want to make it easier to build in America. We want to make it harder to build overseas. We want to make it easier to rely on our great American workers because we got a lot of them. American businesses ought to employ American workers. And we want to make it harder to employ foreigners to take those jobs from the Americans who deserve them. Well, you know what? The President of the United States made a promise, a sacred promise, that the only people who are going to lose access to health care are illegal aliens who shouldn't be in this country to begin with. Because I happen to believe that Medicaid belongs to American workers and American families. I happen to believe that when you are struggling in this country, we're generous people, and we want to help you. But we want to help the people who have the legal right to be in the United States of America. So it's not about kicking people off of health care. It's about kicking illegal aliens the hell out of this country so that we can preserve health care for the American families who need it. And that's what the Democrats never talk about. That's what they'll never tell you. They'll say, well, Republicans want to do this to health care. They want to do that. They want to do all these terrible things, when in reality, if you look at what the Democrats have done, what they've tried to do is to allow millions and millions of illegal aliens into this country, to give them benefits that ought go by right to American citizens, and then to attack Republicans when we dare to stand up for the American citizens who have the right to be here. So when you watch those TV commercials in a year, and John Ossoff, I tell you, he's going to pretend to be a reasonable moderate. He's actually going to run TV advertisements, I promise you, because I ran against a guy like this in the state of Ohio, where he says that he supported President Trump's agenda. But in reality, while John Ossoff pretends to be a moderate when he comes to Atlanta, he is a far-left liberal in Washington, D.C., and that's the only place that it actually counts if you're a United States senator. So why don't we ask John Ossoff, why did you vote to raise taxes? Why did you vote to keep illegal aliens on Medicaid? Why did you vote to bankrupt Medicare? Why did you vote to make sure that people who work overtime and earn their income from tips pay as much to the federal government as possible? And the simple answer is because John Ossoff, whatever he pretends to be in his television commercials, he doesn't give a damn about the 3rd District, and he doesn't give a damn about the people of Georgia. And I remember that 2 years ago, when I took my kids to Washington, D.C.'s Union Station, I actually had a crazy person screaming at my 3-year-old kid. Because for some reason, and I never understood this, American leaders decided it was compassionate to allow people to fester on the streets, yelling at our young families instead of giving them the medical care that they need and getting them off the streets, which, by the way, makes it easier for us to all enjoy these great public spaces in our country. And I haven't been to Atlanta in a little while, at least now with the Secret Service detail. I haven't walked around Atlanta in a little while, but I bet that as great as Atlanta is, and as beautiful of an American city as it is, there are places in Atlanta where you wouldn't take your family today. Is that correct? Just like in Washington, D.C., the national capital of the greatest nation in the history of the world, there are no-go zones where you would not take a young family or you would not take young children. And that's true, I'm sure, all across the state of Georgia, all across our country, because our leaders decided that they would make our streets safe for criminals instead of safe for the people who pay our taxes and keep our communities going. And I think that of all the things that I'm most proud of the president, the thing that I'm most proud about is that he finally put the government to work for the people who actually make this country function and run in the first place. We're cutting taxes for American taxpayers. We're securing the border. We've got 99% reduction in illegal border crossings in this country because we got a president who empowered Border Patrol to keep us safe. And we got a president who's standing with law enforcement to make it easier to clean up our streets, to make them safe for our young families. If you're a person, I don't care what your political party is, but if you're a family and you want to take your kid to a nice meal in downtown Atlanta, it's about a 40-minute drive, take your kid to a nice meal in downtown Atlanta, you ought to be able to without being harassed by a criminal. We got to take America's streets back for the American people, and that's what the President of the United States is doing. First of all, the only people that we say should not get free government health care benefits are illegal aliens and those who refuse to try to even look for a job. It's very common sense. We want, and look, we're going to bankrupt this country if we keep on giving the people's benefits, the people's Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security benefits to illegal aliens who have no legal right to be in this country and never paid into the system to begin with. That is never the design of those programs, is to give them to every person all over the world. They ought by right to belong to the American citizens who paid into those programs to begin with. And that's what we're fighting to make sure happens. And the second response I'd say to that is look, we did a lot in this legislation. Brian worked on it. The other representatives here worked very hard on this to make sure that a lot of our rural hospitals are struggling because of some of the policies of the Biden administration. So what we did is we put a lot of resources and a lot of changes in regulations to make it possible for our rural hospitals to stay open despite what the Biden administration did to them for 4 years. So our policy is very simple. Whether you're in a big city or a small town, we're going to fight for your access to health care. Whether you're an American citizen who's been here for 70 years or an American citizen who's been here for 2 years, we're going to fight for your access to a government that serves you. But if you're an illegal alien, you do not deserve government-paid health care benefits. You need to get out of our country. And that's as simple as that. Well, the first thing I'd say is the state Republican leaders and, frankly, state Democratic leaders, if you're worried about American citizens losing access to health care, the Trump administration always has an open-door policy. And we worked with a number of our colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, at the federal legislature, but also at the state level, to make it possible to ensure that American citizens have access to the medical benefits that they need. It's as simple as that. So you're always going to have an open door. Now, we understand that reforms are complicated. Sometimes this stuff takes time to work itself through the system. Many of the changes in the working families tax cuts to Medicaid, you're not going to see that stuff. It's not even, some of it doesn't even go to effect for 6 or 7 years, in part because we want to give enough time to work with people to make sure that American citizens do not lose access to those critical benefits. So if you look at the way we design the law, if you look at the way that those reforms are implemented, and if you look at all the other things that we're doing, we want to work with people to make sure that American citizens get what they're entitled to. What we do not want is people who have no legal right to be here, to benefit from the generosity of the American taxpayer, and to bankrupt those programs. So long as you're willing to work with us on those goals, we'll work with anybody, whether you got a D or an R next to your name, because we care about this country. We want to make sure it's secure and healthy. I mean, our proposal and our principle in the Trump administration is quite simple. We want Americans to be able to pursue their American dream. Whether that means going to a trade school or going to a 4-year education, going to the military, we want to give you as many options as possible. And what happened for a long time in this country is that you had both parties, both sets of leaders saying, no, 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 no. The only pathway that we're going to fund, the only pathway we're going to help you with is if you want to get a 4-year degree. If you want to get a 4-year degree, great. But if you want to be a plumber or an electrician or a pipe fitter, your government ought to fight for you too. And that's exactly what we want to make happen. And I do, you know, Virgil, part of that is policy. Part of that is making sure that things like Pell Grants and other federal benefits, they don't pick and choose, they don't discriminate against our great trade schools, but part of that is leadership. And I think it's important for those of us who are in positions of leadership to say that, you know, there are so many great careers that require you use your hands and your head at the same time, where you can earn a great living, you can build something great for your fellow citizens and people in your community. We're not going to have enough housing. We're not going to have plumbing that works. We're not going to have lights that turn on unless we've got enough people going into our trade schools. We got to have more kids doing it, more young people doing it, because they're the ones building the American dream of homeownership. They're the ones building the future, and we're going to fight for you every step of the way. All we need is politicians who actually care more about public safety for American citizens than they do for violent criminals. In Washington, D.C., in 10 days of what Donald Trump has done in Washington, D.C., did you know armed robberies are down 55% in our nation's capital? It's amazing. You know, murders in Washington, D.C. are down over 35%. Again, that's in a week and a half of just taking crime seriously. And there's something, you know, Democrats had this weird sickness in the head 5-6 years ago, where they decided that all law enforcement was racist. You know who suffers the most, especially in our urban areas, when you don't allow the police to enforce the laws against bad guys? It is the good citizens, disproportionately black Atlantans, who suffer the most from high violent crime, because you've got more, or at least a disproportionate number of black Georgians living in Atlanta compared to other places. So when you empower police to prosecute violent criminals, that's not racism, that's empowering everybody, black or white, to live safely in their communities, and that should be the God-given right of every American citizen to walk down the street in safety and comfort. Well, first of all, the Congressional Budget Office, sometimes they put out reports that are absolutely atrocious, and I think this is a good example of a very atrocious report. The most important thing for people who are living at the bottom of the income ladder is that they not pay taxes on their income sources. So if you're working hard and you're working overtime, you're going to get a big fat tax cut. If you're working at a restaurant or some other business where you're earning your wages primarily through tips, you're going to get a big fat tax cut. And most importantly, the president's economic policies are going to prevent your job from being shipped off to Asia or to Mexico. That is the very best thing for people at the bottom of the income ladder, and that's why we have the economic policies that we do. If you go back 50, 60 years, what is the fastest period for blue-collar wages rising in the United States of America? It is the time that we are living in right now, thanks to the economic policies of Donald J. Trump. You know what the worst thing for people at the bottom of the income ladder is? It's when you flood the country with millions upon millions of illegal aliens and force our poor Americans to compete for jobs against low-wage foreigners who don't even have the legal right to be here. That is what destroys the wages and the livelihoods of people who are struggling in this country. We want to empower them to live the American dream. That's why we're protecting their jobs, lowering their taxes, and fighting to make their country safe again.